Hello everyone, I'm Asmo and this is the Build Roulette Path of Exile 2 edition, a series where I take a completely random skill and a completely random ascendancy and make a build out of it and take on the endgame content of Path of Exile. The rules are very simple. As soon as the chosen skill can be equipped, I have to use it as my main source of damage, and I can use any items I want. The only objective is to prove that any build can take on the endgame content and beat it. I initially made this series because I wanted to prove that you can play literally anything in the game. Path of Exile and Path of Exile 2 are so complex that the only thing limiting you is your knowledge and time. And if you have enough of those, you can literally slap together any skill and any ascendancy and beat some of the hardest content in the game. And if you don't believe me, stick around and see for yourself. The first step was to get a random skill and ascendancy combo. I have added all active skills and all ascendancies currently available to the Build Roulette on my website, asmology.com, and if you want to have fun and try to generate a challenge build for yourself, you can find a link to it in the description. The combo I got was the Elemental Sundering and Gemling Legionnaire. Honestly, I haven't looked at Ellie Sunder since the initial announcement for Huntress and Spears being added to the game, so I had no idea how it would even work, but the one redeeming aspect of this was the Ascendancy. Gemling Legionnaire is probably the most versatile Ascendancy class in the game, so no matter what skill you're using, you'll get some benefit out of it. The second step was to level the character up. Since Elemental Sundering requires level 41 to equip, I decided that until that point I will level with the Rake Twink setup that I've recently made a video about. Going through the first 3 acts was insanely fast, but now I had to swap to the Elemental Sundering, and I guess this is a good time to explain how the skill works. Elemental Sundering requires one of 3 elemental ailments to work: freeze, shock, or ignite. The ailment can be on an enemy, on an ally, or on a corpse, and when you use the skill, you create a big circle that checks for these ailments and then consumes them to create an explosion for each ailment consumed. You can consume up to 9 ailments at once, which is mainly a limitation for your clearing coverage. The skill is relatively slow, and consuming the ailments and detonating them has a built-in delay, so I wanted to make a setup that uses only one button while clearing without having to do additional setup, otherwise it would feel too clunky to play. I decided to go with the Radiant Grief for ignite and Wake of Destruction for shock. Radiant Grief ignites all enemies in your presence automatically, and Wake of Destruction leaves a trail of shocked ground which automatically applies shock. This way, I didn't have to use any additional skills to guarantee having ailments on my enemies that my main skill can consume for its explosions. I made sure to get those items with high rolls and an extra socket corruption, because that would allow me to take advantage of the 2 scaling talismans that perfectly fit this build: Area of Effect and Presence Area of Effect. Since Radiant Grief only affects enemies in your presence, which by default is 4-meter radius, I decided to scale it as much as possible so that I don't have to be too close to my enemies, and scaling generic AoE also makes bigger elemental sundering area and bigger explosions, which allow for easier overlaps and better overall clear. While leveling through the second half of the campaign, I also used the Perfidy chest, which intimidates enemies in my presence, further taking advantage of the presence area scaling. So that's how we can make the skill work while clearing, but how do we scale the damage? Since this is a spear build, I decided to take the standard approach of Tangle Tongue crit scaling, and I already had a bunch of gear from my previous character that could be useful for it. I used a high crit Tangle Tongue as a weapon, Beacon of Aziz to penetrate fire and lightning resistances since we're doing mixed damage and will always crit, Breach Rings with high flat added damage, Ingenuity to scale those rings even higher, and Gloves with flat damage as well as levels to all melee skills because Elemental Sundering has a melee tag. And one of the unique things about Elemental Sundering is that it also has all elemental tags: fire, cold and lightning. And because of that, we can take advantage of the Sun Splinter, which when corrupted can give up to +7 levels to the elemental Sundering. This is already a really solid base for our damage, but we can do even more. But first, it was time to level the character up. I had a bunch of increased experience maps and tablets saved up, and I ran T16s with shrines and XP tablets as soon as I could, and it was tempting to use a lightning spear at first, but once I got some more AoE, the build started to feel really good even for clearing, which was pretty surprising. I got extra AoE by anointing Primal Growth, using the From Nothing jewel with Iron Reflexes and picking up AoE nodes around it, using Magnified Effect support, AoE Bear Talismans in the helmet, and jewels with increased area and increased presence area, and all together with Herald of Ash, this made for some really juicy explosions. After getting to level 94 through farming the T16 maps, it was now time to get even more damage to tackle the Pinnacle Bosses. Remember when I made a video about this helmet before it was added to the game, talking about how broken it will be? Well, it is, and I'm using it in this build. It requires swapping the helmet, using the weapon swap passives, and exchanging a couple of support gems, but I only did it for the Pinnacle Bosses because, as you can see in the background in maps, I had no problem killing the map bosses in my clear setup with Radiant Grief on and without swapping anything. You might have also noticed that I have two beasts running with me. Why is that? Remember when I explained the elemental Sundering and I mentioned that the consumed ailments can be on enemies, allies, or on corpses? We're taking advantage of the ally part. I'm using beasts with all damage shocks modifiers, conductivity, and the overcharge support, which makes the shock that these beasts apply reflect back to them. And because we're playing Gemling Legionnaire, we can use two identical sets of support gems, one in each beast. This means that we can ignite the boss with Radiant Grief or Flame Wall, shock the boss with our beasts, and then have also two shocked beasts for a total of 4 ailments ready to detonate with elemental Sundering. After getting all of the levels and gear required, it was time to try our Build Roulette character against some Pinnacle bosses. And while the challenge doesn't require me to kill the hardest bosses in the game, and I would be completely happy with just being able to take down their base versions, I wanted to make a point, so here is the entire fight against the hardest difficulty, Zesht +4. Okay, just to show that this wasn't a fluke, here is another Zesht +4. And another one. Okay, I think you get the point. And here is also Arbiter +3. And an Arbiter +4, where I get confused and press a bunch of random buttons. So it turns out that this meme character ended up using some great damage scaling mechanics, allowing us to one-shot Zesht 4 and two-shot Arbiter 4. And honestly, the build surpassed my expectations. It is not something that I would normally play or recommend, but as you can see, it can be done, and you can really play whatever the hell you want in PoE 2. You can use your game knowledge and time to get currency for good gear, you can use them to iterate on a build until you get it right, and this build has a lot of cool tech and items that I think would be really useful to know regardless of what build you want want to play. So let me show you how the build is actually constructed. I'm going to go over the clear setup first, talk about the gems, passives, and items, and then I'll explain the differences between the clear setup and the single target setup, and I think it will be very educational. So let's talk about the gems first. Here I have some spare support gems for the swaps, but the main skill is of course the elemental Sundering. We have a level 35 elemental Sundering because we're scaling it from all of the gear and pop bonuses from Gemling Legionnaire, so that I'll get to in a moment. But level 35, 20 quality plus 14 quality from other modifiers, but it still unfortunately affects or consumes only up to 9 elements. If this could be scaled, it would be a great skill because you could clear very dense maps, but you have to scale area. You're kind of forced to scale AoE otherwise. And you can see how we have 3 components here. We have the cold, fire, and lightning. The lightning here currently is 1746% attack damage, which is a really huge number. Fire is 1500 and cold is 3100. So if you can find a way, perhaps with like the palm skill that freezes enemies, but it only would be for clearing. But if you can find a way to like freeze your own minions and have a bunch of minions that you have frozen and have that near a boss, you will absolutely be able to one-shot anything, right? The cold component is absolutely insane. But while clearing, we're using the fire component, and then while bossing, we're using the lightning component mainly, and then a little bit of the fire one. So that's the pulse itself doesn't do damage, right? That's, I mean, yeah, it doesn't do damage. I think it does maybe like 100% of the damage or something. It's completely negligible. The main thing we're scaling is basically these modifiers here, right? The fire and the lightning, and you could also make it use the cold. So what support gems are we using? While clearing, again, because this is going to be first talking about the clear support, we're using Primal Armament, Immolate, because the enemies are always ignited, so we get the extra 30% damage. Then we have a Rising Tempest, because this is a skill that has all tags, cold, fire, and lightning. So if you just use it once in the past 4 seconds, you have 3 times this bonus, right? So this is 36% more elemental damage. So this applies, and it's very good while clearing especially. Then we have Magnified Effect for bigger AoE, and then because we're scaling insane levels, this has a very high mana cost, so I'm using Inspiration while clearing. There's other things also to help me with mana, but you would have mana issues if you don't take care of it, if you don't pay attention to it. So this is an important aspect. Anytime you want to make a build where you're going to be scaling really high levels of the gem, you need to make sure that you will be able to deal with the mana cost. Then we have Infernal Cry. Since this is a melee skill, we have Infernal Cry with Raging Cry and Raged War Cry, so we can press it twice to first generate rage and then to consume that rage for an extra 30% increase. And then we have Premeditation for extra 15% and Second Wind so that we can actually use it twice. Thunder's Leap just for some mobility. I have Fist of War here, Inspiration, Martial Tempo. You can also use Hit and Run. Then we have the Companions. So Companions, super important. You can farm them in Act 3 and in Act 6 by repeatedly resetting the areas in the jungle. And you can get the up to 4 modifiers on them. I have a whole tab where I saved a bunch of them because I wanted to get really good ones. I have like a Temporal Bubble with all damage shocks. I have another Temporal Bubble, but the Antlion Charger is like any charging, like Roat, Antlion Charger, they go past the boss and then end up being far away from it. So I don't want to use that for single target damage. It's okay for clear because they're pretty tanky, but for single target damage, I would recommend something like, you know, Gorilla, Dire Tusk Boar, anything that doesn't charge, something that will just stand next to the boss in the melee range, because that's where you need them to be in order to consume the shock on them. So we have 2 sets of supports exactly identical in them, right? So they're both level 22. In my single target setup, they're level 23 because we have also +1 to minion skills on the helmet. But so you get level 20 gems that are 6 links. If you didn't know, you can also sell these gems. You can disenchant them and get Tame Beast, and you can see how this retains the quality. I'm not sure if it retains the sockets. I'm not gonna try that right now because I want to keep this gem, but I think it should retain the sockets, but you can get back the Tame Beast gem if you want to by disenchanting it. So the supports that we're using in this are Overcharge and Conduction, because we want to make sure that we shock on bosses, right? Guarantee the shock. I'm also using on bosses Overwhelming Presence to make it even easier to shock. So we have conduction and that, and then overcharge increases the magnitude of it, and it reflects the shock back to the beast. So both beasts will have the shock on them. Then we also have bullseye, because without bullseye, they don't have enough accuracy to 100% of the time hit the boss. With bullseye, they do. So you need bullseye in them. That is very, very important. Otherwise, you will be missing shocks. Then we have elemental army for some resistances, and I like life thief. You could also run meat shield while mapping. You could also run +1 to the level of minion skill gems. That's another thing, but I like the life thief, especially in combination with the aura that has periodic invulnerability. They just heal themselves up and can survive a little bit longer, so it's very useful. The other one, this one has a periodic invulnerability aura, which is very nice, and this one has extra physical damage aura, which does give me a little bit of damage. It gives them damage as well, so that they can shock easier. That's the main reason for that. Flame wall just for single target, because we are in the single target setup, not running the Radiant Grief. And then we're running the Herald of Ash with Cannibalism, as well as Ghost Dance with Fast Forward in our clear setup. Now let's look at the passives in the clear setup. So some things here are for the other weapon set, but let's first go through the stuff that we have here, and maybe starting with the Ascendancy, because that's unchanged between the two setups. So we have the Quality of Skills, which is very nice. This gives us so much good stuff. So for Elemental Sundering, the Quality gives us AoE. That is really good, because we definitely need the AoE. For Infernal Cry, it gives us damage, because we need that for single target damage. And then for the Companion, it gives us reservation. So we have 7% additional reduced reservation on each of these from the Quality. So the Quality is actually very, very useful. Then we have +2 to the level of all dexterity requirement gems. And these gems, the beasts, are dexterity requirements. And also Elemental Sundering is dexterity requirements. So we're getting +2 levels to the gems that we actually need to get the levels to. Then we also have the gem status, so we can use double the support gems. So you can use, for example, Magnified Effect in your Herald of Ash, right? I can put Magnified Effect in Herald of Ash and Magnified Effect in Elemental Sundering. I can have the two beasts with the double setup, right? I can have Inspiration in my Thunderous Leap and Inspiration in Elemental Sundering. So you can double up the support gems. This is a very, very powerful node. And then we have integrated efficiency, and this gives us increased damage and increased critical chance, because we're only using blue and red support gems in our main skill. There is also increased skill speed for every green socketed support gem, but we don't use any green socketed support gems because we don't really need the skill speed. This skill basically needs to be slow enough for you to be able to apply the elements again before you can consume them, so we don't really scale the speed that much, and that's completely fine. So now we're pathing through here, we're picking up some strength and int for our requirements, movement speed that is on the way, and then also I needed some extra accuracy to cap my accuracy, so we picked up these 2 points. We have a movement speed evasion here, scaling crits, so here we have a lot of crit chance. If you are reaching 100% crit chance, then of course you can swap that, but here I am at like 99.97% crit chance, and then the twice crit is like 96.38, so I would like to pick up slightly more to get like 100, but this is consistent enough, so you definitely want to aim close to 100, if not 100. If you are too low, then your damage will feel inconsistent because you're not going to be getting these double crits. The difference between regular crit and double crit with like 600 crit multi is really, really massive, so in order to get consistent damage, you want to make sure that you get a lot of crit chance. So we're getting the crit chance from here. Here we have also the catalysis. This is not only for increased damage, and you'll notice that some of these increased damage nodes I only have in the clear setup, because in the single target setup we're picking up insane amounts of increased damage. You'll see later what else we do. So the increased damage is mostly relevant for when we are actually clearing, and also this one gives movement speed, which while bossing I don't need that 2 extra movement speed. While clearing, this is very, very useful. Then we also have the damage and companion damage, which is applied to us as well through this node, right? Inspiring ally. So any increased damage to our ally is also increasing the damage to us, or companion specifically. And then we also have these cheeky nodes, which give me presence AoE, right? So this is absolutely amazing. The AoE for our beasts is a little bit useful because they do have some auras, right, that you're going to be using. So it does help. But the presence AoE is very nice. And you'll see that my presence is actually pretty big. If if I hover over this, you can see it covers most of the screen. So by default, it is much smaller. It is just 4 meters. So it's like maybe half of that, but we are scaling our presence through a lot of different modifiers, right? So we have these 40% increased presence on the boots. We have presence on these passives, and we have presence on things like the jewels, right? That I will talk about in a moment. Then we're pathing here for the action speed and skill speed. That's just for movement speed, just like so that your character feels less clunky. We have some crit and crit multi, and we're pathing here for a jewel socket from nothing. So this from nothing that I'm using for the clear setup is iron reflexes, and it allows me to pick up these 4 nodes, because there's also another one that give me a lot of AoE. So I'm scaling AoE through this. This is AoE, AoE, AoE. This is like 30 something percent AoE when you pick all of that. And then you have another like 30% AoE here from Primal Growth if you want to anoint that for clear. I anointed temporarily the Storm Charged for single target because I was just doing some bosses. But before that, while clearing, I was running with the Primal Growth anoint. Anoints are really cheap. They're like 30 exalts or something right now to swap between these two. So it's not really a problem. You could literally even just buy second Beacon of Aziz because they're very cheap. So you can do Primal Growth for clear or Storm Charged for single target damage. What else do we have? We are, of course, taking the Trusted Kinship, so you can have 2 companions of different types. And at first, I thought this is only applying to Roa versus a beast, right? Beast companion. But you can have 2 beast companions. They just have to be different monster. You cannot have, for example, 2 Quadrillas or 2 Dire Tusk Boars. They have to be different type of a monster, but as long as they are different type, you can have 2 of them. As you can see, living proof, we have 2 beasts running around with us. So that's why we're using the Trusted Kinship, and we're able to basically get multiple multiply our damage. Instead of having 3 ailments that we're consuming, we have 4 ailments that we're consuming, right? So this is like 30% damage increase roughly by getting this extra beast. So it's very much worth it. And we're also picking up some reservations so that we can fit both of them, because they reserve percentage of your mana. So you can see 42, 39% spirit reserved. So we cannot run really that many buffs beyond that, but it's not really necessary. We're scaling here a bunch of crits, so this is very standard. We have the jewels. You can see we have critical damage bonus, presence area, recover a mana on kill. This is very useful while clearing to keep up with your very big mana cost, and then increased area of effect. So those are the jewels that you want to look for. Right here we have another mana on kill, crit damage bonus, presence AoE, increased area of effect, and I think I have a bunch of other jewels that I was trying out before that I have here. Yeah, this is like something with resistances, critical damage bonus, presence AoE, area of effect, same thing, critical hit chance. So those critical damage bonus or critical hit chance is the thing you can like swap around. The other 3 modifiers, I would just go with always the same setup. So presence AoE, regular AoE, mana on kill, very, very useful. And then mana regeneration rate is also, I guess, something you could have on that. And then, yeah, I also have like a bunch of beasts here. I was experimenting with lots of different gear. So this is like some old gear that I had for this character. But let's go back to the passive. So we're pathing here. You could also path this way, pick up this critical damage bonus and pick up these increased damage. But in the single target setup, the increased critical damage is not really that useful, and it is much better to just grab an extra 20% increased damage if you crit recently here and focus more on the crit scaling. We're picking up the spectral ward and using like the standard evasion energy shield to just increase the buffer a little bit more, so we don't get one shot that easily because we don't have that much life. Scaling all of the crit stuff, picking up some more movement speed, and then a crit and increased damage if you crit recently. And also we have some life on kill. So not only we have the cannibalism for 2%, but also life from death for another 3%. So we recover 5% of our life on kill, and that gives us a really nice way to sustain our HP while mapping. And that is basically the tree for the clear setup. And now let's talk about the gear. So the gear early on, as I mentioned, I was using the Wake of Destruction. But once I was able to capture 2 useful beasts, I dropped the Wake of Destruction, because for single target damage it doesn't really help, and for clear it does help a little bit, but once I got enough AoE, I would much rather just move faster rather than have this extra little bit of damage and like some extra shocks on the monsters that are chasing me. I already was doing enough damage from just the fire, from just having Radiant Grief with a giant presence area, so I didn't need that, and instead swapped to just regular rare boots, but I made sure they have a corruption for an extra socket, right? So that I can still have 2 talismans with presence area of effect. They are the Ox talisman, 20% each, so 40% presence AoE. So that's what we have on the boots. Helmet, of course, is the Radiant Grief, already talked about. This is very nice, foiled, perfectly rolled, corrupted for extra socket, which is the Bear talisman for 8% extra AoE. Very nice. Then we have the Tangle Tongue. This is what I had from the previous build, just a nicely rolled 23% crit. People ask all the time, what is better, having like higher crit or having an extra socket? If you have 100% crit chance with a 20% crit Tangle Tongue with an extra socket, then the extra socket is better. But if you're not at 100% crit chance yet, then it's better to get the extra crit chance, right? Because you definitely want to reach the 100% crit chance with this setup, because you get huge benefit from that with the forking critical hits. So for me, since I am slightly below 100%, this one is the best. Then we have the Sun Splinter, which can give you up to +7. Which one is doesn't matter, right? Basically, the modifier that gives you +3 to either cold, fire, or lightning skills can be corrupted to bump it up to +1. Same with the resistances also. Resistances, you can also get +7 to max res. You can see I have 77 fire, 76 lightning, 78 cold because of the Sun Splinter that gives me max res. So that is very, very powerful, boosts our damage by a huge amount. If I take this off, let's see. So here, just a tooltip, just to, you know, it's not that indicative of anything, but like if I look at this tooltip versus I take it off, yeah, that's half my damage at least. Really massive. Since we're creating, you know, virtually 100% of the time, Beacon of Aziz makes us ignore elemental resistances, so that is very self-explanatory. Then we have the rings, so basically any ring with as much flat damage, physical, lightning, fire, cold, any damage you can. And then you need a bunch of resistances and attributes, as much as you can get. So that's basically what I'm using. And then as high of a roll of ingenuity as you can. If you get anything close to like, you know, between 25 and 30, you can get like an even cheap one. It's still gonna be the best belt you can wear. For gloves, I already explained them a little bit. As much flat lightning as you can, +2 melee skills. Critical damage multiplier is also good, but the flat is more important. So if you have a choice between slightly higher flat versus a little bit of crit multi, the flat is probably gonna win out. You can check that in PoB if you search for like use the upgrade this item function, right? With PoB, you will find that the flat is much more important than the crit multiplier. So because, you know, Tangle Tongue doesn't have that much flat damage, right? So we really heavily rely on the flat damage from our gear, and we have huge amount of increased damage in the deepest tower setup. So it is getting multiplied by a bunch already. So the flat damage, very, very important. +2 levels, also very important. And for the chest, we're using just a basic evasion energy shield chest on a falconer's jacket for extra movement speed with some life and resistances. That's it. That's all you need from your chest. Very standard, like just random defensive charms, just random flasks. And that is the clear setup. And now let's move on to the single target setup. All right, so I quickly swapped to the single target setup, and here it is. We have Elemental Sundering that now has a bigger number because we have different supports here. We have the Primal Armament still, Immolate still, but we have Elemental Focus. Since we are, again not igniting this, if you look at this, you cannot inflict freeze, shock, or ignite with any of these pulses. So we are using the Immolate, which makes you not able to ignite, and also Elemental Focus, which makes you not able to inflict any elements at all, completely bypassing the penalties and simply getting more damage multipliers. Then we're using Execute because, of course, we are using the deepest tower. So enemies in our presence, which now is a little bit smaller, but still big enough, enemies in our presence count as being on low life. So we get 50% more damage completely like from their full HP applying basically, right? And then we also have conk effect, so we have smaller area, but it doesn't matter for single target, so just huge multipliers that we're able to take advantage of that. Another thing that is changed is the fact that we are using flame wall. So flame wall here is basically for the application of ignite. By default it just ignites the enemies. It doesn't matter how big or small the ignite is. I have here persistence, arcane tempo, fortress, and spell cascade, so that we can do like 3 circles that also last a long time and cast them quickly. So that applies the ignite. My beasts apply the shock to the boss and to themselves. So that's the 4 ailments that we're taking advantage of. And overwhelming presence with clarity helps the minions that I have to actually apply the shock, right? So that's the difference in the skill gems. Everything else is the same. So we swap like 3 support gems. That's one thing we're doing. And then when it comes to the passives, we're using the weapon set passives to just quickly respec without respecing specifically, but we're picking these points. So this is huge amount of increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life, lucky damage, right? So huge amount of damage. And then also we're taking advantage of a different from nothing jewel, that instead of grabbing the AoE, which we don't need anymore, instead of these 3 AoE points or 4 AoE points, we are grabbing the finality and a couple of 30% increased damage modifiers. The finality cannot be anointed. This is an important thing to note. It's too powerful, I guess. It's by default, like by design, not possible to anoint it. If you look at every other notable, if I like hover over it, right, you can see it shows what do I need to like what distilled emotions I need to allocate it. This one does not, right? So the only way to get it, if we are not pathing to it, is through the from nothing jewel, right? So that's why we're getting it, but it neatly gets all of the 3 points here. So it's insane amount of damage, right? 120 and then 60, so that is 180% increased damage with just 3 points, right? Absolutely insane, right? Of course, we have to pay the socket for it, right? So this is more like 6 points, but it is still so much increased damage. Absolutely massive. So that's what gives us huge amount of increased damage. And then we drop a few things. So we drop the movement speed evasion here. We drop a little bit of increased damage. We drop the presence area, which we don't need here. What else do we drop? And we drop the increased damage if you crit recently, because we're one-shotting things. So, you know, we don't need that. We're also dropping the life on kill, which we also don't need, and we're keeping all of the other crit stat that we had before. So that is the difference between the setups in terms of the tree. And then when it comes to the gear, of course, we're simply swapping the helmet. So Radiant Grief, we're swapping instead for the Deepest Tower. Absolutely broken helmet, huge amount of damage, scaling with any build that can be close to the enemies. I got one with like huge amount of life, right? So like top life roll, a decent amount of other rolls that on it, right? Chaos Res and armor energy shield, but I also got corruption for +1 to minion skills, so that my guys get an additional level and can be tankier and do more damage for easier shock application. So that's the reason for that. And that is basically the setup. The PoE that I used while making this character will be in the description. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.